So, Constantine, do you want to say anything?
Hello, everybody. I'm not sure if you know it, but the area we introduced today and we talk about today is probably Matt's favorite one.
Yeah. Oh, you mean the topic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I like this more than sex.
We're talking about sex and games.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, but
He's been waiting all
so
day.
I think there are not a lot of people in the world that can say so much about politics and games as Matt. So I'm very happy that he does that, and I think he shows us the dimension that was already touched in the last 2 weeks, but that we could talk a lot about that, and I'm really happy he does that. It's gonna be good.
Okay. So, oh, well, here's Chaplin, but we'll stop that. So, so this is the third part. I know I see a fair amount of you were here for the first two, or at least one of them. So this is the part 3, which is about censorship. Really, the original idea was to talk about censorship in relation to game ratings and the ratings board, specifically the PEGI ratings board, which is the European ratings board. And talk about different controversial issues, and it's really not even so much to come to a conclusion on the topic, but just have a discussion. So we want people to talk and just raise their hand or just blurt out stuff and say what you think whenever we're on a particular topic. But so we did violence and sex, and Constantine and I thought politics would be interesting to do because politics is a really weird area to talk about when it comes to game censorship, because obviously it's a big deal. Lots of games get censored for their political content, but it's something that kind of exists outside the rating system. In other words, if a game has objectionable political content, it's not like it gets a higher rating, right? It's not like 18 for swastikas, right? That's not what you see. It usually is something that it's either banned, like either the offensive content is removed, or the game is banned. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is just get into this topic, and this is more structured at the beginning. It's less structured at the end, and at the end I'm actually willing to invite other people to give examples and stuff. This is not, like before, this is not an exhaustive list. This is based largely on what came to my mind when I was thinking about this stuff, but if other people have other things or examples to interject into the narrative, that's great. But I just wanted to start with talking about political symbols in games, because that's the easiest thing to talk about that actually gets censored. And the most obvious one, which I've already mentioned, is the Nazi imagery, which is a swastika. Well, it says Binding Commando there, but who played this game? Is anybody who knew when they played this game that these were the original graphics? Did anybody actually see this? Like,
no, like I didn't. You
didn't see the swastikas and all over the screen there. So this game came out, I think, in like 87, 88, I don't remember. But it was in outside Japan, it was just called Binding Commando, and inside Japan, it was called Top Secret: The Revival of Hitler. And if you look at the outside Japan one, which I assume was the same one that was released in other parts, so that's actually the censored one. And but this is the original one. And I'm just curious. So this is what I remember seeing, and I'm just wondering who, when you played this game, if you played this game when you were younger, did you know that this game was about Nazis, or did you just have no idea? Does anybody remember?
I actually figured it out in the second you get to spoilers, by the way, for the 20-year-old game. But when you get to the very end and you face the clone Hitler, even with the mustache removed, and even at age like 9, I was staring at that and going, "Guys, come on, it's Hitler." I mean, that was what I knew. Of course, the game was basically over at that point. But so as soon as the face shot of the clone Hitler got busted out,
you see Hitler at the end.
Yeah,
and it's pretty obvious. It's I don't. Did they actually remove his mustache? Because like with 8-bit color, I don't think you can tell. It's pretty obvious.
They didn't actually remove his mustache.
They didn't.
No.
But I'm misremembering the censorship.
He's
Self-censored.
But yeah, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny too, because I remember. I mean, it was like very obvious. In fact, I remember that this is the game that taught me what Nazis were. I remember a thing like, oh wow,
bads.
They were called bads with 2 Ds.
They even kept that into the remake.
And just to give you an idea, this is the actual part of the game where you fight Hitler. Oh, but by the way, this is this guy's obviously a Nazi too in the game, even though you don't see. And Hitler's called Master D, by the way.
The color trick kind
Yeah. And then, you know, Hitler, that's Hitler. See, he does have the mustache.
He swears too, that was shocking.
Oh yeah, he says damn.
Yeah, he does.
You know, yeah.
Right,
So,
in the video game.
We're not doing one about language, but he does say damn. And then, so after you fight Hitler's big giant machine that he was going to win World War II with, if only he had lived to build it, which is the plot of this game. Then your little dude, Hitler's getting away in a helicopter, and you come upon this guy who gives you a big gun for you to shoot him with, because apparently you don't already have one. But so you jump and you shoot, and then Hitler pops out, and this is also a famous moment of game violence too, which is the that's what you say to Hitler. So this is for the Holocaust, yeah, boom, whoa, you know, so extremely violent. But anyway, what's interesting about this game is that even though this game actually came out in the early era of Nintendo censorship, and I think we talked about that before in previous weeks, is when they were censoring violence. When Nintendo was first out in the US, they didn't actually censor nearly as much of the kind of content they censored later. There was actually stuff like that, like this horrible bloody thing. But even at the time, they were like, well, you know, heads exploding, fine, but we can't have swastikas. And and what's interesting is that largely this was at least in the States, this was a Nintendo thing. This was a Nintendo policy. Nintendo was like, we don't want swastikas in our games. But you had other games that came out in the U.S. and people could tell me about Europe also at the time, if you know, that did have them. So I mean, just to give you, oh well, this is more Hitler head exploding. Just to give you an idea that this was so popular, this became like a meme. So somebody did like a 3-minute video clip of like, you know. So anyway, this became a kind of a famous thing. So like the kind of Hitler-ness of this game became a really big deal, sort of in game culture since then. And at least in my view, a lot of it had to do with the fact that the game was very coy about the fact that it was Hitler. It's like the game was like pretending they weren't Nazis, but it was just entirely obvious. And so really the point is that you know, they weren't fooling anybody. And but if you see other games, and I think this game is. Does anybody remember what year the LucasArts Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade adventure game was from, the point-and-click game? What, I mean, it would have been probably like right after the film. The film was 89, so it might have been like 1990 maybe, like a year later. So this was around the same time when, you know, this is on PC, of course, right? So in the PC version, you actually, obviously they don't have any problem with showing all this stuff. And it is important to point out that in both, obviously this is an Indiana Jones game, but in the Body Commando game also, I mean, the Nazis are the bad guys. You know, the game is not pro-Nazi in any way. And then, but it's interesting too, just to go back to showing that it was, you know, part of this Nintendo policy too. This is actually the Nintendo version of the Indiana Jones game based on the same film, where of course you see the kind of the star there, and instead of the swastika. And of course, this actually haunted Nintendo many years later. In fact, during the Super Nintendo era, which would have been a few years later, you also have this is a different game. It's not just based on The Last Crusade, but it's a game that encompassed at that time all 3 Indiana Jones films, and it had, of course, one portion that was about The Last Crusade, and this is the Nazi castle that you're in it, and that's what the swastika looks like. It's basically just like a cross, like somebody was putting graffiti on this flag. And, but of course, like, who remembers, I think we talked about this for the violence too, did we? Did we mention Wolfenstein for the violence? So, this is the PC game, which is famous for you being the guy who runs around and kills Nazis.
I remember this game.
Do you remember this game?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, most people remember this game, but who remembers this game? Most people.
So, for instance, with like in Austria, it's forbidden to use any swastika in public. So like by law. So it was the first time for me as a kid. So like that game was forbidden. Like it was not possible.
This one.
Yeah, it was a forbidden game, and it was my first forbidden game. You know, like it was legally forbidden to play that game.
What could have happened to you if they had found you playing it?
And that was never really clear. Nobody really cared. But it was like, it was the first time that I bought a media product that I got from somebody. Acquired. Yeah, acquired. And I remember going like, wow, this is really forbidden. And then I started the game and I played like for hours. And until I got why it's forbidden, I think it took me really like almost to the end of the game and I realized, oh, it's about the symbols. You know, like, but that was the only reason.
But
so
it wasn't the violence?
not at all. Yeah. No, not at all. So it was really, but it was forbidden for the symbols. And it was the first time for me that I thought about that. And
It was your encounter with the
Yeah.
concept of these symbols being censored.
and asking myself why it is forbidden, like what does it do with me? You know, like
Like how could this hurt me, or
Yeah.
what could this do
yeah.
to me?
I didn't understand at that time that in Austria there's a law called Wiederbetätigung, would be called reconfirmation. So anytime you use this symbol, it's an act of reconfirmation. That was the problem, and I didn't even understand that.
Now, that's an interesting thing. So would it be considered reconfirmation in a film that was about World War II or the downfall of the Nazis,
I
or
think
what?
it really depended in the way you use it. You know, you were allowed to watch documentaries, but especially in that game, they made a big deal out of it back in the days. Like they thought that this gets very close to Wiederbetätigung.
Okay. No. Did you understand why?
No, because like I didn't see like you shoot them. You know, it's like I didn't get the point. Like I thought that's exactly the opposite.
But do you think it was the fact that it was a video game and that it was interactive?
Yeah,
or
they didn't know how to cope with it. Like they didn't know
They
how
were just
which
like-
box they should put
yeah.
that, and so they thought that's just not.
Does anybody else who grew up in a different country or grew up in the U.S. Remember the swastika imagery ever being an issue at all for anybody? For people who know this game, never even was an issue.
No. No, my parents had more of an issue with killing the dogs than with,
Killing the dogs.
Yeah, than with the.
Was that worse than killing the Nazis?
Hmm? Yeah.
Dogs are way better than Nazis. That's more important.
I remember, I mean, this game does imply some occult. It does have some occult stuff in it. I don't know that any occult imagery in it. I know for Doom at least, that was the.
Oh no, there is in some of the later levels. There's like this weird occult stuff because this idea that like Hitler was into like black magic and. Are you saying that was a problem in Singapore?
I mean, I'm not sure if that was a problem nationwide, or certainly more of a problem with my immediate circle. I went to a Methodist school.
Yeah.
So, you know, and of course we were playing this in the computer labs, but, you know,
Yeah.
that was clearly among my circle of friends. We thought that would be the thing that got us in trouble. Not the game playing in the computer lab itself, which would probably be the thing that would have actually got us.
That is actually interesting because the one thing that we're not actually the one section that we could probably do that we're actually not doing, although I suppose we could do it later, is censorship in religion.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, I have a bunch of stories about that. That was like the one thing my family cared about. It's kind of like heads exploding, fine, but if there was like a pentagram in the game, it was bad. So no, but that's actually really interesting. That was the thing that they had the problem with. And just to give you a comparison too, this is the Super Nintendo version of the exact same game. Can you go full screen? I can try. I can at least go, bigger.
That's great.
The thing that's actually funniest about this video is how all the screens are the same.
They're almost really awesome.
I noticed that there's no blood. Yeah.
Yeah. No, because that would be, that would be depraved. Oh, those are dogs.
Because Nazis
I
are
think
full of candy.
Those look like rats.
No, but it's interesting though. It's interesting to look. So one of the things that I'm interested in is what gets changed that in the eyes of the people censoring it actually makes it non-offensive. I mean, they're still Nazis. It's still World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, what exactly is getting changed? I mean, what is that graphic different?
Yeah, they
Yeah,
did
yes.
take out a little swastika.
So they took out a little swastika.
Wait, would that?
Now look at this. This may be what you were remembering, by the way. If you look at these pictures of Hitler, I think they took out his mustache. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, this player actually does look at one close at some point. I'm not entirely sure when, but
It could be any dictator.
Side profile.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, it's like the exact same thing, but. And
It
what,
was kind of stately and British with the no mustache and the close cropped silver hair. It's just like
yeah, so really you're fighting the British in this game. It's an American
Twist
revolution
ending
game
at the end.
where you're trapped in a British castle trying to escape.
These aren't even the same screams, right? Because they're very clearly screaming in German in the original PC
Oh,
version.
wasn't that interesting too? In this game, all the Germans speak English.
So they're not Germans.
No, they're not.
As they're-
They are English.
We've revealed the conspiracy of Wolfenstein.
But the but this is interesting to me. I mean, does this actually change what is going on in the game? I mean, does anybody actually believe that, or does anybody? I mean, I'm just wondering like what people think about that. I mean, is it different? Like, do you think somebody would play this game and think, oh, I have no idea what they are?
I think, well, I mean, in theory, you could say, well, it changes the narrative of you playing the game. It's like, I'm not this, like, heroic World War II hero anymore. But, again, it goes back to, well, nobody's fooling anybody here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think any kid playing this on a Super Nintendo in 1993 or whatever has already known about Castle Wolfenstein from his PC friends and knows exactly what the game is about.
Sure.
Even if the instruction book says, yes, they're aliens in disguise or whatever it said. I have no idea.
I mean, the point that you brought up about, or maybe it was you brought up, that you're like, when you saw the guy's face at the end of Bionic Commando, you're like, well, he's definitely Hitler. So if you already know who Hitler is and you know about the Nazis as a child, and then you play a game like this, I feel like it would be really hard, having seen that imagery, you know, in school, how do you not connect the two things with each other? Even if you were totally ignorant and nobody had told you that explicitly, I feel like just knowing the historical context around World War II and then seeing something like this, I mean, like, just taking out the swastika isn't enough. Like, the eagles and stuff are...
And the helmets.
And the helmets, and, like, all that stuff still evokes that Nazi imagery. So I feel like it would be...
But that's interesting. Does anybody have an idea as to... I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, like, having been, you know, can you figure out, like, what would you guess the people making these decisions were thinking? What do you think they imagined about how the minds of the people playing it work? Like, how is this protecting them? I know you don't agree with it, but just in their imagination, what do you think they were thinking?
I think, though, that they probably weren't thinking so much about the people playing the game as the people complaining about the people playing the game.
Okay.
And they felt that by removing, they're like, well, we can't remove too much. We don't want to change the game fundamentally because that's why it's selling. So, but if we remove these symbolic elements, then we'll satisfy the people who are offended by the imagery.
And who is that? Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Who exactly? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of this in terms of this film is not yet rated, which I may have mentioned before, but is my favorite.
Yeah, I think so.
Documentary.
Yeah. That movie, the documentary about the MPAA.
Documentary about the MPAA, right? And the impression there is that the MPAA was supposed to be parents with children below a certain age, right? And the idea is that the MPAA is supposed to represent the average American family. Well, of course, what the film really ends up revealing is that it represents what the MPAA thinks is the average American family. So I think it kind of follows from what he's saying. They don't care about the people who are actually playing the game. They have this imagined cultural construction of what an acceptable image is and what it isn't. So they just kind of have a checklist, right? Like in the documentary, they find a discarded movie rating list where somebody was literally counting the F-bomb in a movie. And once it went over a particular number, he was like, well, that's not acceptable. So I'm wondering, was there like a swastika checklist, right? Like, did they go through this game and go, well, that's the 15th swastika. I don't think we can have that many. And I think that's kind of how it goes down.
I mean, was the intention just to make a version of this which can be sold in Germany?
That's a really good question.
I mean, if that's what they were aiming for, then they've done it, right? They just removed all the swastikas, and therefore you're satisfying that requirement. And
that's actually a good point too. And this is something that I'm not.
Right.
This is something that I'm not sure about with the whole, because one of the strands of this talk is how, at least in the States, this is something that was like a Nintendo thing. But then eventually, as history moves forward and different game markets in different parts of the world start communicating with each other more, and distribution becomes more consolidated, and people begin thinking about more global markets, you get this question of like, well, Germany has its rules, so how does that affect everybody else? And it is interesting. It actually hadn't occurred to me that maybe they were trying to make a version that would, work for Germany. But also Nintendo had this history, I would say, a long time before that of taking this stuff out anyway. Although maybe even in the original Bionic Commando, it was taken out for those reasons as well, and that actually hadn't occurred to me. Because I actually have no idea how the distribution and popularity of the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System was in Germany in the late 80s.
Is there a German language version of Bionic Commando?
That is a good question. That would have been a great thing for me to look up for this talk, wouldn't it? No, I don't know. That would be really interesting, because I think that maybe one of the reasons why, at least in my own mind, I was imagining it was coming from Nintendo's kind of blanket censorship policies is because Nintendo was notorious for its censorship that was just Nintendo. Nintendo had this image they were trying to cultivate in the early days. Although the fact that Bionic Commando was made before that the violence and sex hammer came down with Nintendo, before Nintendo had developed that policy, but they still took the swastikas out, might actually suggest there may have been some international consideration that had to do with that. It would be an interesting thing to look up.
It's very interesting how Wolfenstein 3 for the NES is very particular about what it's removing. Like it's just removing the swastika, just the one symbol that has like that kind of charge to it, but all the Germanic heraldry is still there. There's crosses in it, yet the crosses don't have any religious meaning because the crosses with religious meaning get removed from other games, like Castlevania.
Actually, yeah. We didn't talk about that either yet. There were a few games during the NES era, NES and Super NES era. Nintendo was also like no religion, although only after a certain point. Castlevania 3 for the 8-bit NES had this giant cross in the beginning that you're praying to, and then 4, kind of all that is removed.
It just really feels like just here's a checklist. These are
the checklist.
There's a very small 5 or 6 symbol checklist.
But this is actually really interesting, and yeah, one of the things I'm wondering is, so it is true that it is this other group, this kind of group they're trying to not piss off. That at least makes a lot of sense to me, but I guess I'm wondering, like, who is that group? Do we have a concept of who that group is? I mean, who are they?
Something about the way Nintendo was operating, especially at that time, sort of makes me think that it was almost imaginary, or it was just that they wanted to have, it was less about pissing people off and more about that they wanted their company to feel a certain way to the consumers, I guess. Because it doesn't seem like, I don't know, like other systems did, like Sega does with Nintendo, but like did they ever do, did they leave religious symbols in? Because I know even up into the PlayStation era, pentagrams and stuff were being censored in certain games.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting question is like, when you're saying that, so it's almost like, are you saying that they almost kind of like brought these groups into existence, this imaginary group into existence by just betting on just kind of trying to play it safe, or
did that group even ever exist at all?
But that's what I'm wondering.
I guess my question.
There's probably a 50-page marketing research brief somewhere that created this imaginary community.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that it's pretty clear in the NES era, Nintendo was attempting to cultivate a family-friendly image, right? In the sense that there's this concept at least in mass media, of the least objectionable viewer.
Yes.
Where the person who's going to object the most is the person that you need to please, because the person who will object less than them will still watch what they're watching. So it's kind of, the market picks up on that least objectionable viewer and says, well, they wouldn't want this or this or this or this, so you can't have it at all.
But that's a good point. But I guess I'm just wondering, is like, just as do the people here, like, do you believe that least objectionable, do you believe that exists in this case, or that? I mean, I know they're kind of imagining what that person would be. I mean, has this ever really been tested though? Like with, because Wolfenstein did come out, and I don't remember, and everybody in here just said that you don't remember there being any controversy about the Nazi imagery in that game, at least in your experience.